by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And second of all, to welcome you here today to the Vancouver Aquarium, an ocean-wide initiative. If you don't know me, my name is Ruth Sharp and I'm manager of the public programs here at OceanWise. And our mission here at OceanWise is to inspire and encourage both the local and global communities to become OceanWise. We are striving to increase the understanding, wonder and appreciation people have for our oceans. And by doing that, we hope to empower them to help protect our oceans' health and our planet as a whole. And I'm going to play you a little video that our content team has recently put together, which I think is pretty awesome. It's a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at some of the work we do with our animals here at the Vancouver Aquarium. See if it plays.
Hey, buddy. Where'd your mom go? We really appreciate you calling it in.
It was a good trip there for you.
100% this animal needed to be rescued, so thank you.
Okay.
This will be number 131. So we've had 131 seals rescued this season.
Good morning, Bella. Good girl. Very good.
Hi, Becky.
So maybe that will also help encourage you to come back to the Vancouver Aquarium during regular opening hours to see some of these incredible animals in the flesh. Incredible and extremely cute. Also, I just want to remind you that all of the videos, all of the lectures are live streamed. So we're live streaming right now. So if you can't make it on the day, you can watch the live stream, and as well all the videos that we have for previous lectures can also be found on our Vancouver Aquarium YouTube channel. So if there's some that you'd like to see and go back and review, you can do that. And in addition, to make it a little bit easier for you to find the videos and when the next live stream is going to take place, on the website I've put an icon here, so you can click this to find when the next live stream is, and then actually to watch the live stream on this page. So that will hopefully make it a little easier for people to find the live stream if you would like to partake of watching the videos remotely. And so also to let you know that the next monthly lecture will be in January, due to December being December and full of Christmas and holiday celebrations. There won't be a December lecture, but in January, I'm very excited. We're going to have Valeria Vigara, who is a researcher here at OceanWise, and she studies beluga whales. And so she's going to be talking about some of the work that she's been doing, looking at these incredible whales. So she's actually worked here at OceanWise for 16 years, and her research is focused on captive and wild beluga whales. So she should give an absolutely fascinating talk. So I hope I can see you in 2019. And also to remind you that, again, thank you so much for coming. I'm very happy to see you here despite the appalling rain. We'd had a slight reprieve this morning, and unfortunately it's back again. So thank you for braving the terrible weather to make it here. Just to remind you that it's free for everybody to attend, and we do that so that we can make it as accessible as possible for as large number of people as possible. But it's not free to put on. So if you do have a few spare coins in your pocket, anything that you can give will help us continue these lectures in the future. So that would be absolutely fantastic. And now we're on to the real thing. So I would like to introduce Brooke Besson, who you've come here to hear. Brooke began her career as a certified vet technician at the Phoenix Zoo and is now a reserve responder and medical lead for the Humane Society of the United States animal rescue team. Brooke has worked with wildlife for over 30 years. She strives to make science as accessible as possible, like we do, for all ages. And so therefore she's written 7 books. In addition to Vaquita, the book that she's here to talk to you about today, she has authored the Arizona Highways Wildlife Guide, as well as 5 children's books. So after the lecture, if you're interested in buying Vaquita, Brooke's book, they're on sale outside. You can pay with cash, obviously, but also with credit and debit card if you'd like to purchase a book. So with that, I'd like to thank... I'd like to introduce Bess. Thanks. Right. Which one's yours?
That's perfect.
Oh, I don't know how to make it full screen.
I think we just click this
There you
one. There it went. Oh,
I should have got you a table, sorry.
no worries. We've got a book that wants to jump here. Thank you so much, Ruth. And thanks to the Aquarium for having me, and thank you all for joining me. I just will give you fair warning, I'm a bit of a walker when I talk, so I'm going to try not to knock anyone over, and we're going to have some fun tonight. I am going to tell you tonight what led me to write this book, what led me to research vaquita, and more importantly, what I discovered along the way. But first, I want you to know something about me, and that is that I am not a journalist. I have spent my life working with animals of every shape and size, and my mother tells a story that she says has always defined me. When I was a little girl, about 5 years old, I stood just about level height with the kitchen countertop. And one day, as I was in the kitchen, hanging out, I saw a fly that was buzzing around, and it came down and it landed right on the countertop in front of me. And I started watching him. And he had this little proboscis tongue, and it came out, it was licking the counter, and he was cleaning his wings and his legs. Oh, I was so fascinated. Well, suddenly my mom showed up on the scene with the fly swatter. And I turned around and squealed and was like, "Why would you kill him?" And she said, "He's eating off the countertop." Well, I looked at my mom and I looked at the fly and I said, "But he only eats a little bit." So I've also spent a lot of time in and near the ocean, learning about and writing about the magnificent marine species that inhabit it. After working as an assistant on many research projects, I began conducting research marine studies in Golfo Dulce, Costa Rica, where I scientifically investigated the lives of whales and dolphins and sea turtles, and these rare little yellow sea snakes, which my co-author Gary Gilbreth and I recently named Hydrophis platerus xanthos. Xanthos is Greek for yellow. As for writing about vaquita, it all began with this t-shirt. I was traveling down into Mexico in 2008, and I stopped at this research station called Sado, and it was there that I first learned about vaquita. They were already critically endangered, and at the time there were only about 250 of them left. And they were quite enchanting. And so I bought a t-shirt to support their conservation. 2 years later, I wore that t-shirt to the American Cetacean Society conference, and it caught the attention of a lovely woman named Cheryl who came running up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, how did you know about vaquita?" She was working then for a relatively new organization called Viva Vaquita, and because not very many people knew about vaquita at the time, she convinced me that I should write a book about them. But unfortunately, I was wrapped up with my research in Golfo Dulce, and I was working on another book, and so the idea fell to the back burner. Well, by the time I started writing about vaquita in 2016, the situation had become a full-on crisis. But here's the thing, I didn't know that. When I bought this journal and I collaged the cover as a way to begin immersing myself in the topic. I had no idea what I was getting into. In this journal, I wrote all the experiences that would soon follow. And to be honest with you, the stress, the challenges, the risks that faced me goaded me to quit. But once I saw what was happening, I just couldn't turn back. So, just to be clear, this is what I imagined when I planned my research for this topic. An adorable porpoise struggling to survive in a changing world. Well, the day I arrived in Mexico, this was my introduction to vaquita. Photos from the day's finding on a nearby beach. And when the initial shock wore off, the biologist I was with turned to me and he said the strangest thing. He said, well, there's one good thing about dead vaquitas. I thought, what in the world could that possibly be, right? And he said, their bodies are proof that they exist. Yes, it turns out that vaquitas are so shy, they're so rarely seen, that many people in the region actually believe they are mythical animals. Talk about an obstacle to education. And remember, I'm not a journalist. This was just shocking to me, this whole introduction. Well, of course we know vaquitas do exist. In fact, they've been gracing the sea for 30 times longer than Homo sapien has walked the earth. Vaquitas are endemic. Let me see if I have a pointer here. I think I do. Oh yeah, there we go. Vaquitas are endemic here to the upper Gulf of California in Mexico. And there are 3 communities here now, San Felipe, El Golfo de Santa Clara, and Puerto Penasco, Rocky Point, where I got my t-shirt. And these animals are found nowhere else on Earth. Because this is in Mexico, and the native language of Mexico is Spanish, as you know, and in Spanish, as a gendered language, vaquita is feminine, la vaquita. And for that reason, native speakers often refer to the species as she or her. And this was something that really captured my heart when I first began my research, and it really influenced not only how I think about vaquitas, but how I ended up writing about them. So the species, Phacinocenus, was first described by science in 1958. In 1985, it was listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. But it wasn't until 2 years after that, 1987, that biologists first saw the unique skin pattern of this animal, that charming tint of black around the eyes and lips that led to the nickname Panda of the Sea. At only about 5 feet long, that's like this long, vaquita is the smallest cetacean in the world. It also has the narrowest range of any marine mammal, inhabiting a space about the size of Rhode Island in the United States. After the functional extinction of China's Yangtze River dolphin in 2006, vaquita became considered the world's most endangered marine mammal. And the population has continued to shrink, recently at a horrifying rate, upwards of 50% per year. Now, in 2010, remember I went to that American Cetacean Society conference? That was right about here. I attended a lecture by vaquita scientist Lorenzo Rojas, and he reported there were about 200 vaquitas remaining, down from almost 600 in 1997. When I started writing the book, there were about 60 left, and now there are fewer, likely fewer than 15. These official population estimates are derived from scientific data, a combination of large vessel sighting surveys and acoustic data. And it was the calibrated acoustic data that gave us this number of 30 in 2016. This is Gustavo over here on the right. And Gustavo helped me from the moment I arrived in Mexico. He is one of the scientists collecting and analyzing acoustic data for vaquitas. And he is standing here with 46 passive acoustic monitoring devices called C-pods. Each C-pod is anchored underwater. It is equipped with a hydrophone that can record vaquita sonar clicks that they make when they're echolocating. From the data that they get from these C-pods, the scientists are able to tell not only where vaquitas spend their time, but also how many are left. And I was lucky enough to get to go out a couple of times and help exchange C-pods in the water. And on this occasion, I was with two fishermen contracts, Victor and Gordis. So the C-pods show the vaquita numbers going down. But unlike other species that face myriad threats, vaquita suffers only one: gill nets. Gill nets are the most common type of fishing gear used in the waters where vaquitas live. They are relatively cheap and easy to use. Fishermen just hang them in the water, either attached with anchors or loose in the current, and they can come back hours or even days later and haul in their catch. Gill nets are very effective at catching fish, but unfortunately, all kinds of other animals get entangled and drown in them. Animals like whales and dolphins and sea turtles and sea lions and, of course, vaquitas. Remember, these are air-breathing mammals like us. Vaquitas have been drowning in gill nets, commercial gill nets, for decades. But in 2012, things took a rather unexpected turn. Illegal fishermen began setting gill nets in the dark of night for an endangered fish called totoaba. Totoaba, like vaquita, is endemic only to the Gulf of California. This is the largest drumfish in the world. It once grew up to 7 feet long, over 300 pounds, and ran in schools by the hundreds that was said to roil the seas. Now, it too is listed as critically endangered. Totoabas are poached for their swim bladders, the fish's buoyancy organ that helps it go up and down in the water column. The meat isn't even eaten. These giant, beautiful fish, whole bodies thrown back into the water to rot. Why so much death for a swim bladder? Swim bladders from totoaba are worth big money. Dried and smuggled from Mexico to China, often through the United States and perhaps Canada too, are part of the same multi-billion-dollar black market that peddles in all kinds of endangered wildlife parts. Think rhino horns and tiger bones and pangolin scales. One swim bladder like this could sell for up to $50,000 to a Chinese buyer. They are served in soup, all for the promise of a nice complexion. Now, with Chinese mafia and Mexican cartels driving this lucrative operation, things have gone off the rails in the Upper Gulf. To understand what is happening in the present, though, we must look into the past. And this is not an easy thing to do in these small communities because there's not a lot of recorded history. So I sort of floundered around for a while until I came upon a little book called Pescando Entre Mareas, Fishing Between Tides, by Peggy Turk Boyer, who actually is the director of SATO, where I got my shirt all those years ago. in the book, I came to learn that the story of the decline of vaquita did not just end with Totoaba, it began there too. In fact, those 3 little communities that I showed you earlier, they all began as fishing camps that specifically harvested Totoaba swim bladders for the Chinese market. That was 100 years ago. And until 1975, when the Totoaba fishery collapsed and became illegal, Totoaba was a very common fish sold in United States grocery stores. Even after 1975, there was some Totoaba poaching, although, as you can imagine, it was a fairly small amount because the stock was so depleted. So this is not a new story. It's just now a very big and well-heard story in the media. And in fact, for the last couple of decades, there is a hatchery in Ensenada, Mexico, that has been trying to help the species recover. They have released hundreds of thousands of young Totoabas back into the Gulf of California. And some people argue that they are just feeding the Totoaba trade. You know, they're just putting gill nets, keeping gill nets in the water. But there are actually a lot of discussions about opening an aquaculture program, like a full-bred program that would allow the Totoaba meat to be sold at market, and that might even allow a quota-based hook and line fishery for wild-caught Totoaba. So these things are all in discussion. But of course, gill nets are not just for Totoaba. Almost every fishery in the upper Gulf uses gill nets. In fact, fishermen have various sizes. They have different mesh sizes of gill nets for whatever the season's catch is, the target fish. And one fisherman told me that if fishermen were honest, they have all caught vaquita. In fact, sitting on his couch in San Felipe, he told me the story about coming back with his coworkers to haul in their Sierra nets and finding 2 vaquitas thrashing around at the water surface. By the time they were able to cut one free, the other one had already died. And I think it's also important to mention here that the bulk of the harvest from these nets, from all of these nets in the upper Gulf of California, have been mostly imported into the United States, and in direct defiance of their 1972 Marine Mammal Protection Act, which basically says that no foreign fisheries will cause the death of too many marine mammals. So Mexico is not the only one culpable in the loss of vaquita. Mexico, in fact, has worked hard to try to take strides to save vaquita, and currently there are 3 overlapping protected areas. This dark gray pentagon is designated the Vaquita Refuge, but the part I really want you to pay attention to is this giant gray rectangle, this big area, because that is where, in 2015, the President of Mexico announced an emergency gill net ban, which was made permanent in 2017. So this area, this whole gray area, all of the legal gill net fisheries are closed. But that is also the same area where the poaching is running rampant. Enter Sea Shepherd. As of 2015, Sea Shepherd has been working in the upper Gulf of California, and unlike some of their other campaigns, they are working in partnership with the Mexican government. And they have been given the authorization to patrol the waters and also to confiscate gill nets. And they are actually making a tremendous difference. They are on almost all volunteer-run crew. These folks care very much about vaquitas and the communities there, I think. And they have really worked hard to protect the waters. But Sea Shepherd doesn't have the authorization to actually arrest anyone, or, they don't have jurisdiction like that. And so they have to rely on the Mexican Navy to have their back. And something strange has happened in the last couple of years. The Navy hasn't been showing up. So the folks on Sea Shepherd have told me that they come along, maybe even in the broad daylight, they come along, they find poachers, and they call them in to the Navy. We've got poachers, and they give the locations. But those poachers just flip them off, and they just keep working, or they just ignore them, and they keep working. And Sea Shepherd waits and waits, and about 5 minutes before the Navy shows up, those fishermen haul in their illegal nets, and they disappear. This has happened over and over again. Now, Mexico's Navy officials say that as a military entity, they have limited authority to chase down civilians, even if those civilians are poaching. But all the locals say the Navy's on the take. Let's recognize that Mexico has a history and a reputation for corruption, right? We all know about this. But I think it's important that we dig deeper, that we try to understand where that corruption comes from. And there are 3 main reasons people have given me for the corruption. One is that law enforcement officials are not paid very much. And so within the culture, they actually count on corruption money to subsidize their income. And the second thing is that many of those people change positions too frequently to be investigated, or certainly to be prosecuted. And then the third reason, which I think is also very important, is that there is a lot of pressure to comply, right? And we all know how it feels in our own communities to have cultural norms that even we sometimes go, really, or is this really? But it is what it is. And so we comply. And it's not just corruption that is hindering the efforts to save vaquita. Culture also plays in. People just don't care about vaquita. The idea that they are mythical animals is compounded by the fact that fishermen are angry about the gill net ban. Just imagine, you're a fisherman living in a small fishing village, and you depend on gill nets for your work, for your livelihood. It might be pretty difficult to convince you that a porpoise is more important than feeding your family. We can all understand this, right? So, what about alternative gear? Alternative fishing gear, that's brilliant. Wouldn't that solve it all? Fishermen could work and not kill vaquitas? Well, alternative fishing gear has been available in the upper Gulf of California since 2008. But Mexico's national fisheries agencies, called PESCA, have knowingly obstructed the process of authorizing and permitting that gear. Even worse, PESCA insists that gill nets are not killing vaquitas. If they give up vaquita as bycatch, they will then have to acknowledge all the other animals that are killed in gill nets. So they are motivated to deny. Add to all of that the long arm of cartels. There have been many, okay, maybe not many, several, enough shootings in the region related to the Totoaba trade and to the police corruption to make people scared of speaking out against crime and corruption in their communities. So honest people are oppressed. They are held silent. And many of those people, when I interviewed them, they did not want their names revealed. And yes, that did make me nervous. In fact, this right here was a public demonstration. That boat had Sea Shepherd graffitied on the side, and it was burned in the middle of town as a threat to conservationists, not just Sea Shepherd, but others as well. And so the guy who sort of initiated this whole thing, the leader of this demonstration, and yes, burning boats in San Felipe is illegal. The guy who led this, his name is Sunshine Rodriguez, and he didn't even go to jail. He wasn't even arrested for it. But here's the thing. Despite all the fear and all the frustration, there are people working so hard to save vaquita. And I want to talk about some of the moves that they're making that have already shown some success. So Mexico's Ministry of the Environment is overseeing a gill net removal program. They are working with many institutions and many NGOs and many fishermen contractors. And together, they have already removed over 1,000 gill nets from the waters. And this is effectively slowing the decline of the vaquita population. Not to mention that any animals lucky enough to be found alive are rescued and released. And that has included, in the last few years, whales, humpback whales, and sharks, and rays, and sea turtles, and even this beautiful little sea jelly. I have some other really fun news to share. This is encouraging. Just a couple of months ago, scientist observers photographed 6 individual vaquitas. And in that 6, 2 of those were calves. And the mother of one of those calves is Anna. This is Anna. She is recognized by her unique dorsal fin, and she was seen last year and again this year. And I just can't help but wonder, now that we know Anna, that we see her and we know her as an individual, will it make us more committed to saving her? There's a really great idea that's in discussion right now, and that is to partition off the last of the very small area that vaquitas are still found and actively guarding it so that it will act as an on-site sanctuary. And I think this is a really wonderful idea because poachers will be able to see that visual barrier, right? And then the guards will be able to actively protect that specific space. So I think on a lot of levels, we will have benefits from it, including us as the public. We will then be able to see this space and say, this is the space we're working to protect, maybe with our donation dollars or maybe with our volunteer hours. And the guy who has been helping push for that sanctuary idea is a man named Diego, and he works with Museo de Ballena. There are a lot of organizations who are being recognized for their incredible contributions to this cause, like Sea Shepherd, for example, and World Wildlife Fund, Mexico. But I want to talk a little bit about these local people who live there in Mexico, who are doing their best to try to help vaquita and are doing so in wonderful ways. So Museo de Ballena has been involved in the gill net removal program as well. And Diego was very much involved in the project to get those scientist observers out on the water so that they could see those vaquitas recently. And here's a few more people I want you to meet. This is one of my favorite pictures of my friends at Islas del Golfo Co-op. These guys here are fishermen contractors. They are not only setting, deploying, and retrieving sea pods, but they are also working with the gill net removal program. And many of them care deeply about vaquita and are very, very much committed to their salvation. And imagine, these men, they live right there in the community where the cartels are working, and despite that, they are out on the water working for vaquita. This is a gentleman named Leo Gonzalez, an artist. He lives in El Golfo de Santa Clara, and Leo is turning his house into a work of art. he is hoping it will inspire his neighbors to see vaquita as part of the beautiful local marine fauna. And this is Mamuko. He is a muralist in Rocky Point. And not only is Mamuko painting these extraordinary murals of all kinds of endangered animals, including vaquitas, but he goes into schools and offers free programs to help educate the kids about the vaquitas. And down here in the corner, let me step out of the way so you can see it. This is Jose Maria Cuevas. He has opened this restaurant, La Vaquita. And he says that it's his way to bring awareness to an animal he feels his community has forsaken. All of these people are working for vaquita. And by the way, if you ever do get down to San Felipe, I encourage you to go to La Vaquita. They have the best guacamole. Really yummy. It's the first place I go every time I arrive in town. So my question now is, how can we help these people? How can you and I, in our homes, not living there, not working there, but being here, being away, and even in other countries, what can we do to help these folks to protect vaquitas? And I'm just going to give you 5 really quick things that you can do. One is to work to keep up on this story, understand what's happening. We can't help if we're not paying attention to what is going on. And right now, vaquita is running out of time. So we really have to get on board with this. Secondly, if we can raise awareness, and that really means telling other people about vaquitas. I am willing to bet you that if you go out in the community and start talking with your friends and your family and your coworkers about vaquitas, you're going to find that most of them don't even know what a vaquita is. So we can't save an animal we've never heard of. So please tell others about its plight. And then if we want to save vaquita, we are going to have to find a way to get the people working on the water every day to see her value. And so that means that we need to fund and support organizations that are working with the communities in meaningful ways, that are helping not just educate them, but working on alternative gear and ways for them to be successful as fishermen and still be sustainable. And there are many organizations doing that, by the way. We can also keep our eye out for legislation that relates to drift nets or gill nets, whether those are in Canada or the United States, or Mexico, or anywhere else in the world. Because one of the main threats to marine mammals, coastal marine mammals worldwide, are gill nets. This is not a solitary story about vaquita. So we can pay attention to that and help protect not only vaquita, but other animals too. And last, but perhaps most important, is do your choices at the grocery store. Protect animals like vaquita. As consumers, we have tremendous power to influence industries that are causing animals to decline. So we really need to put our money where our heart is. Many of you may know that there was a capture attempt last year, which was aborted after it ended in the saddest possible way, with the death of a vaquita. Not this little girl, she was actually released, but it's a reminder that now we must focus. We must all come together and refocus on saving vaquita in their natural habitat. This extraordinary animal has been gracing the Sea of Cortez for millions of years. And she is this close to going extinct. Can we change course? Despite all that I've told you tonight, I believe we still can. I do. I really, truly do. But with less than 15 of these left, we are going to have to all come together. You and me, our neighbors, our friends, we are all going to have to do our part to serve this cause for her. I would like to I know we have some time for questions, and I would like to talk with you guys about this. I'd like to even hear your thoughts about all of this. But before we do that, I want to read a little piece from the book, if you don't mind. I'm going to read a poem. This poem I wrote, oops, let me see if I can get this. Did I get it? Yes, okay. So this poem I wrote at the beginning of my journey, and it's a poem that I wrote when I learned about the extinction of the baiji, China's Yangtze River dolphin. Remember, that animal went functionally extinct in 2006. And after learning about the story of baiji and how that applied, perhaps, to the story of vaquita, I wrote this poem, which now comes at the beginning of the book. It is called Goodbye, Baiji. Gone. Done. No more to do, not do. We stood along the banks and watched you go under, popping up desperate gulps of air. Again, again, time ticked between sightings. Too much time. We bored of your life, your struggle, turned away, turned the channel. We tired of your incessant need, your slow demise, your death. Yet when at last the obituary was written, we cried out, shock and grief wetting our voices. What? You are gone? Done? Now what will we do, not do? Thank you. So, do we have some time for questions?
Yep. So we have, a few minutes for questions. Due to the live streaming, if you want to ask a question, I'll come and bring the microphone to you. It would be good so that you could speed things up a little bit. If when Brock's answering the previous question, if you could maybe signal to me so I could get the microphone to you, so you're all set to go as soon as Brock's ready for the next question. And also, just so that we can get in all the questions that people want to ask, if you can keep your questions short and ask just one at a time, and if you have more than one question, we can come back round to you if we have time. So I think I saw someone over here with a question.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. I'm curious about the natural history of both the totoaba and the vaquita in terms of their lifespans. So if, particularly the fish, if it was 7 feet long, how long would it take to grow that size?
That's a great question.
Thank
So the totoaba can live up to 50 years. And one of the things about the totoaba relating to its lifespan and to gill nets is that fishing often is harsher on animals that are late breeders. And totoaba don't start breeding until age 6 or 7. And so their reproduction isn't as fast as some other species of fish. So they are very long-lived animals. In captivity, the largest totoaba kept in captivity only was about 150 pounds, and a female that was one of their breeding stock there. And so the totoabas don't live as long in captivity as they do in the wild. And I think part of that has to do with the facilities, the ability for them to manage very, very large fish. A number of them in captivity is challenging. Did that answer your question? As for vaquita, lifespan for vaquita, they don't know exactly, but the longest lived was about 21 years. So they think that's probably about based on other porpoises. Yes.
You said that when they had a vaquita in captivity, it didn't work out. What did you mean by that?
Okay. So a lot of people are wondering if it might be possible to keep vaquitas in captivity, even short term, right? So that while we're trying to figure out the whole thing in the upper Gulf, there could be some protective care for the vaquitas. So after lots of discussion, they did make a captivity attempt last year. And vaquitas, porpoises in general, and vaquitas, it turns out particularly, are so shy that they became readily stressed when they were captured. So that little girl that you saw earlier, she was the first vaquita they captured, and she was stressed, and the veterinarians made the decision to go ahead and release her. And so she was let go back into the Gulf and swam away. The next one that they brought in was an adult, and she was actually quite calm, and so they thought perhaps she would do better, that her age might make her more stable for captive care. And so she did pretty well at first, but then her stress state began to decline, and eventually she was released. But just after she was released, she apparently had a heart attack, and so they began emergency care to try to care for her. There were wonderful veterinarians on the team, and everybody, as you might imagine, these are the people who have worked their lives to care for vaquitas. It was a very caring team of people who did their very, very best over a course of about 3 hours to save her, but they were not able. So that captivity effort was aborted, in part because there are not enough vaquitas to keep trying that.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
About if there's only 15 vaquitas left, is there enough genetic diversity within the population?
I love this. This is a
remain
great
healthy?
question. Yeah, because I think this is a really important question that comes up. We all hear about inbreeding, and then we wonder, with so few vaquitas, if we could get the gill nets out of the water, could they actually recover and have genetic viability? And from everything that I've learned and the scientists that I've talked to, the answer is yes. They could recover. There have been several species, endangered species, that have come down to single digits and have recovered. A perfect example of that, just really quickly, is the California condor, which came down to 22 birds in the wild, but all of the birds now, there are about 300 free-flying California condors now. They came from 8 birds, 8 parent birds. So, and there are some other examples as well of animals that have come down to really low numbers. But more importantly, vaquita has always been a rare species. In other words, it's lives in this small habitat, right? And so it's very specialized. And because of that, it only ever supported a certain number of vaquitas. It's not like there were hundreds of thousands of vaquitas at any given time. In fact, statistic modeling suggests there were maybe about 5,000 vaquitas originally. And the benefit of living as a rare animal is that over thousands of years, those populations purge their lethal alleles. They purge the genetic characteristics that cause premature death, right? And so that allows them to be less disposed to genetic decline. So they're, and I always say, we all know, you buy a couple of rabbits and give them some time and you'll get 200. I mean, there may be some challenges for those the calves in the early years, mortality or things like that could come up, I guess. But in general, if they're given space, everybody who works with vaquita, every scientist I've spoken to says, quit killing them and the population will recover.
I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a little more on your method as a scientist in this research. You've mentioned a little bit about kind of using existing research and talking to other scientists, as well as conducting your own maybe qualitative interviews with other people. So I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit more of your process.
Okay, yes, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. So I work as a wildlife researcher, but my scientific research is not around vaquita. So my work has been in Golfo Dulce, Costa Rica, and I've written many papers on that work, but it's a separate habitat and lots of different animals. But I also write books, so I do both of these things. And so in this case, when I finished my work in Golfo Dulce and had wrapped that up, at least for now, because I will be going back to do more research there. But when I got the break, that was when I felt like I really need to jump in and tell this vaquita story. And so the writing of vaquita and my work with vaquita is only as an author. So everything that I have learned has come from the other scientists working with vaquita. Also, though, I spoke with townspeople and fishermen and NGO leaders on both sides of the border, and activists and sort of anybody and everybody that I could to try to understand what was happening. And the book that I ended up writing, as you will find if you have an opportunity to read it, is different than I would have written as an expert, as a scientist. Because, in fact, it's one of the things that I think I really like in the end about the book, is that instead of writing as an authority, instead of writing and saying, here's the story, here's the facts about vaquita, I ended up writing it as the story unfolded. And so I was bringing the reader along with me as we together discovered both the horrors and the touching moments of Vaquita's story.
So I was curious about the fishermen that you spoke with.
Yes.
How receptive are they to alternative methods of fishing? And also, could you talk more about the alternative methods as well?
Yeah, sure. So there are various kinds of alternative gear, right? And one of the problems with alternative gear is that it's not as productive. Gill nets are very good at catching fish. So they go out, people call them walls of death, because you can just imagine these nets come along, they find schools of fish and they just catch them all. Alternative gear is more selective gear, right? Because we're trying to keep vaquitas out. And because of that, it can be more expensive, it can require more skill from the fishermen, and it can have less return. And so all these things factor into whether or not fishermen want to make the change. And in many cases, fishermen too are a little reluctant to try alternative gear because they've been so successful with their gill nets. So this is about making a cultural shift, and it's also about testing those gears and finding ones that work best. And then for you and I and all of us in the market to pay the premium for that sustainable gear so that the fishermen can fish and still make an income. Does that make sense? Yeah, and I also think as in terms of the gear, there's a couple of them out there that I'll just throw out to you. One that they were looking at for a long time, that's been around since 2008, is a light trawl. It's an active gear, which means that instead of being left in the water, the fishermen have to pull it behind their boat. And it has all kinds of, like it has TED devices, if anybody knows what those are, the turtle excluder device. And it also has other modifications, if you will, to this light trawl to keep from getting other kinds of bycatch than the target fish. But most recently, the alternative gear that they're looking at are called suriperas. This is also an active gear, and so it means that the fishermen are there in the water with the gear, and it has a very good record. And Pesca is finally starting to think about they're promising permits for that gear, although to my knowledge they haven't come through yet. But those suriperas may prove to be, at least for shrimp, which is the main harvest out of the Gulf for the fishermen, that may prove to be the gear that they'll go with.
Has anybody got any other last questions?
While you're going up for that, I'll just add one more thing, and that is that, remember we talked about the Marine Mammal Protection Act out of the United States and the imports to the United States. The United States is now enforcing their Marine Mammal Protection Act with regards to vaquita, and that is why Pesca is now starting to think about offering suriperas. So it just shows the power of our voice.
Hi again. Just wondering, I've heard sort of mention of the Colorado River and the lack there of water, making it to the Gulf, and the possible implications or causes of the decline of the vaquita. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I sure can, and I think this is an important question. This often comes up. So remember we talked about the habitat for vaquita is near the Rio Colorado Delta, where the Colorado River comes into the Gulf of California. And when the United States put in the final Glen Canyon Dam, when that was complete in 1963, the flow into the Gulf came to a stop. And it did alter the habitat quite visibly. So what was once a lush sort of riparian area is now more deserty and doesn't have the same kind of appearance, aesthetic. And so it was not wrong. It was, of course, it was important that scientists go in and begin to look at whether that might play a role in the decline of the vaquita, right? Because of the habitat change. It was an obvious concern. But what happened when the scientists went out and started looking, and there were many studies looking at this, but what they found is that the vaquitas are consistently healthy. Lots of healthy vaquitas, lots of healthy calves. Vaquitas eat a wide variety of fish, which are still readily found in the Gulf. And vaquitas were always plump. They didn't have any weight loss that would suggest that their prey base was deteriorated. They also didn't have any lethal parasite loads or any diseases. And so nothing that showed a decline of the habitat, something that you would have expected to see with ecological suspects. But what they did always have and continue to have are marks of gill nets on their bodies.
I'm just wondering what it is about about the vaquita that restricts them to such a small area, such a small habitat.
I think the way I would think about that is looking at the history of the species. So as we know, toothed whales broke off about 50,000 years ago, and then porpoises 30,000 years ago, I'm sorry, I think about 30,000 years ago, and then porpoises branched off about 15,000 years ago, and then about 3,000, am I saying 1,000? Do I keep saying 1,000? Sorry. Yeah, that's very short, right? Okay, so porpoises branched off from the toothed whales about 30 million years ago, and then shoot, I'm sorry, I'm screwing this up. I'm just completely screwing this up. 30,000 years, 30 million years ago, we end up with toothed whales. 15 million years ago, we end up with porpoises. 3 million years ago, the Gulf, the Baja Peninsula breaks off from what we now call mainland Mexico, right? And it creates this gulf, which is about 700 miles long. So it's very, very long. And this group of Pacific porpoises migrates in and migrates up this long channel all the way up, and then adapts to that upper area in the Gulf. And so for them to turn around and move out, I think I don't know if it could or would ever happen, perhaps. I mean, evolution does all kinds of interesting things. If they're given a chance, we'll know. It's an area up at the top of the Gulf that is different than the rest of the Gulf. So yeah, it's kind of a specific habitat. It's mostly marked by shallow waters and silty waters. So vaquitas are typically found in waters less than 100 feet deep and within 16 miles of shore.
Okay, I think with that we'll end there. So thank you so much for such a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
And I hope you're all maybe inspired to make a little bit of a change. And if you want to buy Brooke's book, it's for sale just outside. So thank you again. And thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks you guys for braving the weather.